Hey guys, welcome to Baseball Outsider. I'm Josh Giles, and today joined with me is Branch Rickey, president of the Pacific Coast League and grandson of former Brooklyn Dodgers president and owner, I believe, Branch Rickey.
Part owner, yes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for joining me today, Branch.
Glad to be here. Glad to be invited.
So, if you don't mind, just tell me a bit about your job and what you do as president.
Well, what I do as president nowadays, under the impact of the current coronavirus, is certainly a little bit different than what I've been doing for the past couple of decades as president of the Pacific Coast League. I became president of this league in 1998, having previously been president of a league called the American Association. When I first came to the American Association in 1991, there were three AAA leagues in the United States. And at that time, 28 teams in AAA baseball. And when Major League Baseball expanded from 28 to 30, AAA baseball found itself forced to similarly match that number. And as we added two teams, the teams did not fit the three leagues in any convenient manner, because one of the teams that was going to be added, Durham, wanted to belong to the International League, making them would have made them an odd number of teams, and one of those, Memphis, would have made the American Association an odd number of teams. And we decided to completely realign AAA baseball in the league that I had so capably helped develop for the 7 previous years that I had been president, the American Association. I helped to dissolve. Its wonderful 100-year history, I took it into oblivion. So I smile about the fact that my first role as league president was to lead a league into nothingness. But we sent 3 of those teams into the International League to join Durham and make that a 14-team league. And 5 of those teams, plus Memphis, came over to the then 10-team Pacific Coast League, making it a 16-team league across 3 time zones, something that was considered an extraordinary reach geographically, because across those 3 time zones, which reached as far east and south as New Orleans, and as far east as Memphis and Nashville, and up to Des Moines and Omaha on the northeast quadrant, also extended into Canada and included Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. So we just had an enormous geography. And that took me into an involvement in a part of the country which my prior background in player development on the major league side, I had spent a couple of decades previously as a director of player development for a short period with Cincinnati Reds, but for a much longer time with the Pittsburgh Pirates. I had never really dabbled at any great length in the western part of the United States. And so involvement as a president of the league with the Pacific Coast League in all these wonderful cities, mostly in the western part of the U.S., has been a fabulous involvement for me. A league office primarily focused on the overseeing of the efficient operation of the league, responsibility for all the umpiring activities, the assignment of the umpires and the travel of the umpires, the enforcement of the discipline, any disputes that happen on the field, arguments and ejections and so forth. A league office sets up the league schedule and oversees relocation of team locate. One of the very first things, I hear you are Canada based, but Canadian centric. And one of the very first things that we realized we needed desperately to do was remove ourselves from Canadian involvement because of the difficulty with our geography of travel, which took us across an international border, took us across customs and immigration, and in many cases, complications in disruptive travel, changing carriers, changing airline carriers, and the complications of changing from American carriers to Canadian carriers or vice versa. And so one of the very enterprising involvements I had was helping our Vancouver franchise relocate, and we found a very successful effort on that front, taking that club to Sacramento. Our Calgary club moved to Albuquerque, and our Edmonton club to where our league office is now, Round Rock, Texas. The owner of which was Nolan Ryan, who has some standing as a former player. I love
Oh yeah.
I love the understatement of that. So as a league president, you do more than I kid youngsters, little kids who come up and ask me to sign a baseball they may have gotten in a ball game, and of course every ball in play in a league has the league president's signature stamped on it, imprinted on it. Official baseball, and it's the league president's signature is imprinted on it from the factory. And I'll hold the ball up and I'll say, "Oh, well, there you have my signature. You don't need my signature. You have my signature." And they look at it with surprise, and then I sign it, of course. But besides signing baseballs, those are some of the other duties that we do. And really, if you want to boil down the central responsibility of a league office, it would be that of concern for the security and the safety of the league, and the risk that of unforeseen factors that linger out there anytime you have economic disruption. And if you want to say one of the most unpredicted and improbable you could have not anticipated, it would have been the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the coronavirus, it's affected baseball tremendously, including the minor leagues. I don't know if you can speak for the minor leagues as a whole, but can you speak for just the Pacific Coast League on how it's affected there and the players there?
Oh, the damage has been severe. The damage is so unfortunate. So many lives disrupted. So much that still isn't known. Minor league baseball is entirely dependent upon revenue from fans attending games. And without fans coming into our ballparks, we have the disaster of how to pay employees that are on the staffs of the ball clubs. We have the disaster of the salaries for umpires who are employees of the league. The players are under salary to the major league clubs. And so it's the major league clubs who are responsible for those salaries. And you've probably seen press coverage on how some of the major league clubs have been disrupted in dealing with those situations, and there's been a variation in the way major league teams have been handling that. And at the same time, while they're facing the challenges of how to deal with the major league players and reach negotiations there. So we have a widespread sadness across the Pacific Coast League in both the delay in the opening of our season this year and in the uncertainty. I think there's terrible. We have so many talented young people working for our clubs. If there's anything that strikes me about minor league baseball, it's the amount of initiative and enthusiasm and determination and resourcefulness of the people that staff our clubs. We are remarkable for the energy and dynamic quality of our staffs, and their commitment to wanting to make careers in professional baseball. It's just scintillating and inspiring to be around them, and the energy is buoying. I love visiting our clubs and being in contact with that kind of those people, but not having a certainty as to when we're returning to play. When it goes month after month, can be so draining. And that's one of the things that falls to leadership, to a league president, and to ownership, to the ownership of the clubs, to give assurance and to have insight to indicate what the future holds. And we are crippled on that front, is the truth. We're crippled. We are having great difficulty having any more insight than our national leaders are for the larger economy. So we have the same malaise that our broader worldwide economy is having right at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully baseball can bounce back soon, and everyone can get back to play safely, and everything will hopefully turn back to normal. But let's shift the conversation over to your grandfather, Branch Rickey, who is most well known for introducing Jackie Robinson to the league. Can you kind of just talk about the bond that they had, and maybe your personal experiences with Jackie Robinson as well?
Oh boy, that's a big subject. That's a broad brush, and I don't think we have time here to do it justice, but I certainly enjoy the opportunity to reflect on it. It's I guess it's so wonderfully personal for me to have that background, to have that connection to my grandfather as a youngster, and going back to where those years were so much closer to the event of Jackie Robinson coming into baseball. There was so much more turmoil and so much more controversy, so much more dynamic energy about it. And I know as a little boy, I really didn't think that this was the greatest thing in the world to be attached to my grandfather. Uh, Not just for the Jackie Robinson part, but at the end of my grandfather's career, as he had come over to the Pittsburgh Pirates, we had the concurrent thing of his legacy on the Jackie Robinson thing that of such great pride. But as we had come over to the Pittsburgh Pirates and living in Pittsburgh and divorced from the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the Pirates were in 8th place in an 8-team league when we came over, with a bad farm system and no prospects of getting out of 8th place in an 8-team league. And the next year we were in 8th place, and I was in grade school, and the kids were taunting me about being in last place because their fathers were making fun of the Pirates, and they would make fun of me being related to the guy who was in charge of the Pirates. And the next year, more fun, and the next year more fun as we were in 8th place again, and it was a bad thing. The Rickey name was no great thing in Pittsburgh. And I wasn't so sure that, and there were, of course, undertones, negativity, not towards just being in 8th place, but towards the Robinson thing. And I wasn't sure this Rickey thing was all that great an attachment. Little did I know what as a grade schooler. What an incredible, I knew I had an incredible grandfather because he was an uplifting individual to be around. He was one of the warmest and energetic, and he just there wasn't a moment around him that you weren't excited to be alive. You wanted to spend every minute you could being close to him, because he had so much mental energy, and he contaminated you with his excitement about this thing or the other thing, whatever it was. It just, you wanted to be around him, and he put that energy into the entire family. And we kind of had a larger, always seemed that my cousins were in town from out of town, and they were attracted to come back into town and be around him. And I grew up on edge of the farm next to him, and I was always across the pasture and at his house, it seemed. And I knew he was one of the most special human beings I could be around. We had a wonderful family life, a very, very vibrant. My sisters were electric. My father was even more exciting and more. He he was lively, and it was just a wonderful childhood. But this going out in public, and the Robinson thing was no great shakes in Pittsburgh at that time. And the 8th place Pirates were no great shakes. And this Rickey name was no great shakes. So it has been a percolating thing over my lifetime to now, these many years later, I could not have been gifted with a greater baseball legacy to have spent my life in baseball and seen how that pendulum has swung. So for social acceptance, for baseball, there were so many people who were competitive with my grandfather in the sport. When I got into the sport, and my grandfather was already out of it, and my father had passed away, unfortunately, from complications of diabetes. But there were still so many people who had been competitors against my family. They wanted to beat the Dodgers so badly. They had been competitors against the Cardinals, and they were anti-Rickey. They saw me come in, and I was the embodiment of another Rickey coming along. They didn't want another Rickey. And so being a Rickey was no great things when I started my career. So I'm trying to describe to you that just this Rickiness and this career in baseball has seen such a wonderful swing to where all of those antagonisms, all of those challenges, those conflicts. Now I have just my own personal conflicts. They're inherited. They aren't anything residing from earlier historical background. Any problems I have in the baseball industry, they're ones that I triggered myself. But no, the baseball industry is just, for me, filled with friends, filled with marvelous relationships. This minor league, this conversion that my life has had, moving from major league involvement to minor league involvement, is the happiest. I can't. We don't have enough time to talk about how marvelous, how magnificent the minor league world is, how it has blessed my life, how it blesses the life of so many of the people that are fortunate enough to spend their careers, be able to make a career out of minor league baseball. But so I'm trying to describe to you how that pendulum has swung, and I have seen this social thing of Jackie Robinson being controversial, Jackie Robinson being an intruder, Jackie Robinson being this upstart, Jackie Robinson being this where'd he come from kind of thing in the 40s. Well, I was so young, but the everything that, all the stories and all the whatever negativity there was initially, and see that growing admiration and the spillover and the bonding of the Robinson and Rickey name to this residual marriage of recognition for something my grandfather did because morally he recognized the right that belonged to this race. And I think a lot of people think that it was Robinson that precipitated the decision. It was not Jackie. My grandfather had to find Jackie. It was the decision he made that precipitated the search for Jackie. And that was a hard search. And it was a hard thing to fit Jackie. Jackie was a square peg in a round hole. Jackie didn't fit. And as a grandson, I tell you, and everything I know about the history, and I'm immersed, I'm baptized, and I am as fully cultivated in this whole argument. Jackie, from most logical perspectives, was a square peg in a round hole. I would swear to you, because he was just a stellar athlete. Oh boy, we could spend a week on that argument. My goodness, what an athlete. But he wasn't a baseball player of that kind that really would have told you. And I'm going to claim some minor league glory on this. My grandfather didn't sign him with the idea he could go directly to the major leagues. He put him in the minor leagues. He put him in Canada first. He put him in Montreal. That may have been my grandfather's greatest genius. He put him in Montreal, the Montreal Royals, where Jackie was embraced. I was going to use a religious metaphor there, and it would be inappropriate. but Jackie was it. I'm just going to say Jackie was treated as if he were, as his wife said, Rachel, as if they were royalty, because he was treated for his actual baseball skill and his actual character and his actual overall talent. And Montreal didn't ever want to see him leave. Montreal's greatest disappointment. Well, it was a marriage made in heaven, and Jackie could have been elected anything he wanted in Montreal by the end of that season, and that really was a in retrospect, it was genius. It's wonderful. Retrospect is a great thing.
It's true.
And so that caused my grandfather to have the assurance that this guy could be extraordinary at the major league level. Now he needed the other components, the other circumstances. Even then, given this fact that this is an extraordinary personage, and I'm saying personage, not player, extraordinary personage for this challenge at the major league level, and player, of course. I'm admitting that thing of player, obviously extraordinary player, but personage for this major league challenge. Even then, it's an overwhelming obstacle for the United States, for the American pastime, and yet for an American, it's almost forgotten in hindsight. The national pastime of the United States is bordered by the fact that here you have your national pastime, and the team that is the furthest west in the United States at that time. I'll challenge you on this, just for fun. It's
probably say Pittsburgh.
St. Louis.
St. Louis. Oh, okay, yeah.
St. Louis, the furthest west. The team that is furthest south in the major leagues of the 16 teams, 8 teams national, 8 team American. Team that's furthest south in the United States.
Oof.
It's a trick question. Same team.
St. Louis?
St. Louis is the So the United States national pastime is being played in one quadrant of the United States. It's being played in the northeast of the one quarter of the United States. It's not being played in the deep south. It's not being played in the far southwest. It's not playing in the northwest. It's being played in the northeast. So anyway, I don't know why I got into that, but that is where Jackie has got to make his impact. And one of the extraordinary things is in April of 47, Jackie breaks into Major League Baseball, called up from Montreal. I'll get in Montreal again since this is your podcast. He's called up in April of 47, and by October of 47, this fella, who primarily is a football athlete, you could say. Of course, he was all conference in UCLA in basketball. He set 19 records in UCLA in track. 19 records.
Wow.
He was also a distinguished tennis player. Didn't play tennis at college. There's only one sport he didn't excel at: baseball. So this fellow who has no pedigree in baseball. He's played a short while in the Negro Leagues where no attention is given him nationally. Nobody even knows he's playing. This fellow who begins his career in April of 47, by October of 47, a survey is taken by Look magazine, and they take a survey of who is the most admired American. I will argue, well, anyway, and the result is, of course, the most admired American is Bing Crosby, a singer, whose most notable achievement, I think, in one of his most notable achievements these days, is that he's remembered for singing White Christmas. And everybody sings White Christmas when Christmas comes around. So everybody knows roughly who Bing Crosby is when you say he sang White Christmas. Well, Bing Crosby was thought to be a wonderfully paternalistic kind of warm. He was the crooner, Bing Crosby. What's interesting is the person that finishes second in that balloting is Jackie Robinson, most admired American. What American do you admire most? Jackie Robinson finishes second. From April to October, I would argue to you that that Look magazine poll didn't poll a single Negro back in those days. What would have been said a Negro. Did not poll a single Negro. I would bet that survey did not. All Caucasians. Jackie won over Caucasians. He won over white America. Not to say he didn't win over the entire African American population. I would say there wasn't an African American in the United States that wouldn't get down on their knees and pray to Jackie Robinson to just keep on doing what he was doing, because he gave such great hope. Such great hope in that direction. So what a staggering start. And what an incredible thing. And the thing that I'm going to say where Branch Rickey's impact, so little known, so little appreciated, so little understood. The movie 42 did give some that Harrison Ford starred in a couple of years ago. I've been trying to tell people, don't I have the same profile as Harrison Ford? I'm hoping people think I look more like Harrison Ford than like my grandfather. Now I've forgotten where I was going with that thought. Where was I going with that thought?
I don't know.
What did I just said? I'm drawing a quick blank on the thought that I was pursuing.
About how we won over America?
Winning over America.
Yep.
And oh my goodness.
That's okay. We can come back to it. Now, Robinson at the time.
No. Now, it came back to me that, but where the overview that is sometimes so lost, I think is the best word.
Yeah.
Is that my grandfather, when he interviewed Jackie, and Harrison Ford portrayed this in the movie, emphasized on Jackie the need to not strike back. He would be taunted. He would be abused. He would be thrown at. Pitchers would throw at him. In fact, if you go back and look in the records, Jackie was hit by pitches more in his first year than the entire Dodger team was in the year before. Rather remarkable statistic.
Yeah. Now,
so my grandfather said to Jackie, I want you to do one thing. And he spent a 3-hour interview with probably 2 hours of the 3-hour interview dramatizing, play acting. He took off his suit coat and so play acted through this. He had ended up sliding on his carpet in his office, sliding into Jackie, getting up in his face as if he had slid, and angrily jumped into his face and portrayed a player that would shout angrily and slurs, racial epithets, and trying to provoke Jackie, seeing if he could stir Jackie to anger. Because if anyone who knew Jackie, anybody who knew Jackie slightly, knew that he was one of the most intense athletes. In fact, the great football running back for the Cleveland Browns, Jimmy Brown, once said to me at a dinner, he said, you know who the most intense athlete is I've ever known in my life? I'm looking at Jimmy Brown, who set more records than about any running back in the history of football. And some people think is the greatest running back of his, was the greatest running back of his time, maybe the greatest running back ever, and often carried several players with him as he was going down the field. And I was afraid to answer that question any other way than, you, Jimmy. I wasn't sure how I was going to answer that question. He responded to me, Jackie Robinson was the most intense athlete I've ever known in my life. Well, how are you supposed to get a player like Jackie Robinson, one of the most intense athletes, not the most intense athlete you may have ever known in your life, to turn the other cheek? Big, big, big challenge. So imagine Jackie Robinson sliding into second base, and the second or the reverse, Jackie Robinson playing second base, and a player slides in and spikes him, as actually did happen, cuts his leg open, and then says something to him by way of a slur, which actually did happen. Jackie's standing there with a baseball in his hand, inclined to just nail him right there. And Jackie Robinson, a former All-American football player, can punch this guy out just as quick as lightning. And no, he's supposed to turn the other cheek. Mm-hmm. Look up the box up there. Mr. Rickey's up there watching me. Maybe I better hold off. I better hold off. Mr. Rickey's watching me. I better not do that. In the heat of competition, you don't look up there in the box and say, well, Mr. Rickey's watching. I better not do that. There's only one thing that can stop Jackie Robinson from punching that guy that's just spiked him. I'm bleeding. I'm hurt. I'm angry. And he's just said that to me. Only one way that's going to stop Jackie. And that is if Jackie understands what his mission is, and he has it in his heart. You may not be able to see I'm pointing to my heart, but that's that maybe not yet. And that's what my grandfather portrayed to Jackie in that interview. And that's what Jackie picked up. And that's what, when we talk about Jackie, nobody talks about the genius of Jackie Robinson. And that's what I come away. Why? One of the many reasons. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool admirer of Jackie Robinson. He had an intuitive genius. I don't know. I don't mean. I'm not sure what his genius was as an Einstein in physics or in engineering or in whatever other academic material you want to cite, but in the intuitive genius that he applied to understanding life and the dynamics of what his challenge was and what he was doing, what he was out to accomplish for the human race. I'll say the human race. It's an extraordinary thing. It's inspiring. His role in our culture, I think, is rightly measured. So many athletes of that era and earlier, who had much longer careers, who set many more records: boxing, weightlifting, tennis, golf, whatever sport you want to choose, track. You talk to people today and you have to explain those names to people and what records they set and why they were so extraordinary. Yet Jackie Robinson's legacy is more alive today than maybe it was in the 1940s.
It's true.
It's incredible. It's brilliant. It's growing. It's not dimming.
Nope.
And it's not because of, nobody knows how many bases he stole, how many home runs he hit, how many doubles. Nobody knows that. It's the courage he demonstrated. It's the character he demonstrated. And the restraint he showed in the face of such awful tendencies on part of people of another race against him. And I think that's very, very, very poorly emphasized by comparison to some other things that are granted him. We think so of Jackie. So thanks for giving me the chance to demonstrate that, to emphasize that. It's a proportion. It's a proportion.
Now,
if I answered your question.
Now, you mentioned earlier back in your last answer about how it was a strenuous search to look for or to find Jackie Robinson for your grandfather. Can you first off tell me what? Can you first off tell me what led him to make the decision to integrate an African American into the league, and then secondly, why Jackie Robinson specifically?
I've got a lot of background noise here. I put you on mute for a second.
Oh.
Yes. My grandfather grew up in Southern Ohio, and what's little known about his background is that his rural circumstances were outside of Portsmouth, Ohio, were such that they had trouble fielding a baseball team. They had to use everybody. And quite often, everybody included kids from a area across the river, which were Negro kids. And so my grandfather had the good fortune to have exposure to playing with blacks when nobody else, had, I say nobody else, but a good majority of white Americans didn't have that elbow rubbing acquaintanceship and familiarity. So subsequently, when he was in college and due to having played a summer of semi-pro baseball and after the fact being declared ineligible for his college baseball team because he had received $75 to play semi-pro baseball, they named him coach of the baseball team. And he had a African-American player on his team who, when they went on a road trip to Indiana, the player, when he tried to register at a hotel, was refused lodging. And he negotiated with the desk, my grandfather negotiated with the desk clerk to temporarily have the player go up to sit in his room and wait for him till they could solve the housing, because he was the only African American player, and the team was supposed to be registered at that hotel, and he was traveling with the team, and the desk clerk said he wouldn't register him, wouldn't allow him to register. So when my grandfather did go up to the room, he found that player sitting on the foot of the bed, and he was wringing his hands, and tears were coming down his face, and he was pulling at the fingers of his other hand. And as my grandfather reenacted it, he said he looked up at him and he said, Mr. Rickey, if I could just pull the color off, I'd be as good as any other man. I'd be just as good as any other man if I could just pull the color off. And I think the combination of having played with colored players as he was growing up, and having this player who was the best player on his team, and seeing the searing emotion of just wanting to rub the color off his skin so he could be just as good. As my grandfather went on subsequently and was general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals ball club, this player went on to become a dentist in Albuquerque, and he would stop on his travels back to Albuquerque and would visit my grandfather in St. Louis. And they, in those days, there weren't any blacks allowed in the grandstands. So if he was going to be in the park, he was going to have to sit out in the bleachers. And my grandfather wasn't going to sit out in the bleachers. He was, I guess, and didn't want to subject his former player and teammate or former player to sitting out in the bleachers. So they would sit in his office and during the game and visit. He would talk to them, and they wouldn't go out in the stands, and he would just visit with them in his office. But it stayed with him. He said that it was that episode that had caused him to promise himself that if he was ever in a position to have some impact, that he would want to make a change in that. His time in St. Louis was the southernmost and the westernmost city in professional baseball at that time. But St. Louis was a deeply southern, and he spent 3 decades of his baseball career. It was the year that he left St. Louis and he went directly to Brooklyn. And Brooklyn in the Second World War, coming out of the Second World War, was as wonderfully a mixture as you could possibly find anywhere in the United States. There were immigrants from Europe living in on blocks in Europe, right next to each other. They would settle Jews in one block and Italians in the next block and Polish in the next block, and everybody had their cultural, ethnic identity, and brilliant and bright, and so wonderfully tolerant, so wonderfully. While they all tried to live together, I think for in many cases for linguistic reasons, so they could talk to each other, but they all mixed. Everything was a brilliant mixture. And so immediately it dawned on my grandfather. So actually, prior to the signing of Jackie Robinson, my grandfather had 3 years. He immediately went to the ownership of the Dodgers. He had 3 partners. They gave him a quarter share of sweat equity stock in the Dodgers that he grew to earn sweat equity. And subsequently, he went to Red Barber, the broadcaster, 2 years in advance of ever signing Jackie or ever finding Jackie, and said, "Red, I anticipate bringing I keep coming back to the word Negro, the parlance of that era. Red was from Alabama, and with deep Southern traditions. And he said, Red, I have anticipation of bringing a Negro to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I understand with your background, it may not be something that you're going to be comfortable with. And I want you to know that if this is going to, and Red was probably the preeminent broadcaster with that deep, wonderful, deep drawl of his. He had endeared himself to Brooklynites, and he was just such a brilliant broadcaster. If this is going to be impossible for you, I want to give you time to make an adjustment, make a change. And Red ended up that meeting saying, Mr. Rickey, I would love to have a chance to share this with my wife. And if it's okay with you, I'll come back next week and I'll tell you. And he came back and said to my grandfather, Mr. Rickey, if you're going to do this thing, I want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of the Dodgers. I want to stay with the Dodgers. I'll handle probably the unsung hero, the most unsung hero of the Robinson success, Red Barber. He's cheated totally of credit because he handled by radio, which was of great importance in broadcasting what was going on in Ebbets Field, what was going on in our national pastime in baseball in New York City to that market. And people heard. Red Barber said, and now Mr. Robinson is on deck. And Mr. Robinson comes to the plate. He never showed any bias. He never showed any favoritism in favor of Jackie. He never showed any paternalism. He never showed any bias against Jackie. He treated him with complete impartiality. And that was the perfect thing for Red Barber to do with those deep Southern roots. What glorious command he demonstrated. Professionalism. And Brooklynites, of course, I said to you already, Look Magazine gave its poll. Do you think people weren't influenced by Red Barber? I will guarantee you that people across the country were impacted by Red Barber. I don't know where the question started, but I know where I have strayed to. Red Barber and I'm a deep. Anybody that doesn't know about Red Barber should go on and listen to podcasts about Red Barber. He ended up with NPR in the golly, in the 90s, I want to say. They gave him a Friday morning, 5 minutes every Friday morning. And they'd call Red Barber down in Tallahassee and say, "Well, Red, what's up?" And Red would give them a 5 minute summary of the flowers growing in Tallahassee and what was going on as far as he knew in the sports season. So he was a magnificent human being as well as a very, very, very clever broadcaster.
That's very cool. It's very cool to learn about everyone in and around the whole story. I think we're nearing about an hour now. Probably, I think I'll wrap it up here.
All right.
Don't want it to
I
go on
don't,
for too
I
long.
don't know if we've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish.
No, it's okay. I learned a lot, and I'm sure, sometime down the road we can meet again and chat even more about this subject, because there's so much to talk about. Right.
Very,
And
the,
so
the, the,
sorry.
the impact Robinson has had on our society. I say Robinson, I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just such a familiarity. Jackie Robinson is an ultimate hero of heroes. He's had a magnificent. I just wish in all of this turmoil we're going through today in our society, the great the great power of his legacy could shine stronger on an everyday basis, because he's an inspiration for all human beings, and to have any attachment to him, however undeserved. My grandfather wonderfully said to me, I want no credit for recognition for having signed Jackie Robinson. It was a wrong that deserved to be corrected, and I deserve no credit for that. And that's been a powerful message to me. I can brag about it. Nothing I did. But it's a wonderful thing to brag about, not because it was my grandfather, but to brag about because it's worth bragging about, that it finally got corrected. And it needs to be pointed out how two people so different in background, two people who had nothing in common seemingly, came together and in the blink of an eye found common purpose and put themselves together to accomplish something that armies couldn't accomplish in the same fashion. Not in the same way. Two human beings, two individuals, one white, one black, one young, one old, one at the start of their career, one at the end of his career. People of such seeming dissimilar character came together, and look at the wonderful accomplishment. It's an instructive thing to young people today. You don't have to be like the other person to accomplish something great.
It's true. Well, I, we should wrap it up here. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Branch. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity.
All right.
Sorry to have been a whirlwind of whatever it's been.
It's okay. We got what we needed done.
All right.
So it's okay.
A real pleasure to have been on with you.
Thank you very much. I'm
Good luck
Josh
to
Giles.
you.
Oh,
Good luck.
thank you. I'm Josh Giles, joined by Branch Rickey. This has been Baseball Outsider.